EQ is the most important plugin you have. You do not want to use it wrong, otherwise your mixes will always sound like bedroom demos. So keep watching to learn the 11 biggest EQ mistakes that I see DIY musicians make over and over again. Avoid these EQ mistakes and your mixes will soon start to sound more professional. But first, be sure to grab my free EQ cheat sheet to get access to more tips, EQ charts and more. It's completely free. There's a link in the bio or on screen now. So let's dive right in with mistake number 1, which is applying EQ without intention. To me, this is kind of like getting in your car, driving at full speed, but in no particular direction. Sure, you'll get somewhere, but who knows where? And who knows if it's a good place to be? Now, the same thing applies to mixing, and it most definitely applies to EQ too, because if you just load up an equalizer and start playing around with EQ for the sake of it, because you feel like you need to, and you're doing that without intention, sure, you might change the sound, you'll end up somewhere, but is that where you want to be? And just using EQ for the sake of it is one of the biggest mistakes I see amongst musicians who produce their own music. So here's what you should do instead. Decide what you're going to do before you load up your equalizer. It's that simple. Figure out what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, and then that will quickly tell you how you go about achieving that intention. So let's have a quick listen to this mix. It's very early stages. I've done a volume balance and some mix bus processing, and we're just trying to do some big broad sweeps to take the mix in the right direction. So let's compare this to some references and try to identify some problem areas.
Get me low. You get me low now. Tell me. Let's take out the 1, 2. You get me low now.
So what can you hear there? What are the issues with the whole mix? We're not focusing on one particular instrument right here, just focusing on some broader issues. To me, straight away, I can hear that there's too much muddiness. It doesn't sound as clear. It sounds like it's kind of clogged up in that lower mid-range. And it also sounds like it could do with some more aggression in the upper mid-range. This Foo Fighters track,
Oh, sweet ignition, be my fuse.
it's got quite a lot of aggression in that kind of 5K area. And we're not completely lacking that. Maybe just removing some of that mud will open that up a bit. But there we go. We've got the intention, and now it's easy to go about fulfilling that. We know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it, and now we just need to figure out how. And I already know that I'm going to start by identifying where this muddiness is in this low mid-range and cutting that.
Get me low. You get me low now. You get me low.
And I still think it could use a little more aggression in the upper mid-range.
Get me low. You get me low now. You have no choice, you have to.
So there we go. That's a step in the right direction. We can come back to this later on in the mix, but we've done quite a big move there. We had an intention, we went through with it, and it was easy then to figure out where to cut and boost. So have an intention. And now let's move on to mistake number 2, which is only using subtractive EQ. There are a lot of people out there who are still saying, hey guys, never boost when using an EQ because... Well, okay, once upon a time, this was good advice. When you were working with an old school desk, it would add noise, it would eat up headroom, and it would mess with the phase, all of these issues. But now it's one of the worst pieces of advice that has somehow clung on and still appears around the web today. But it doesn't really apply to digital mixing. And even then, if I was mixing on an analog desk, I would completely ignore this often repeated piece of bad advice. It all comes back to this idea of intention. If you have an intention, it doesn't matter what you need to do to get there. There are no rules in mixing, like only use subtractive EQ. If there's somewhere you want to go, something you want to do whatever you need to do to get there. So if you need boost to do that, do it. It doesn't matter. Ignore this rule completely. You can see here how I started with a cut to see if that was enough to reduce that muddiness and bring out that upper mid-range, but it wasn't. I had to add a bit more. I didn't want to cut more because then it would start to sound a bit hollow, but I still wanted more aggression in the upper mid-range, so I had to add it. I wanted less mud, so I cut the mud, and I wanted more aggression in the upper mid-range, so I added it. Just completely forget this whole subtractive EQ idea. Mistake number 3 is only using EQ on individual channels. Again, you've already seen an example here of me using EQ on the whole mix. And after I finish my mix bus processing, I would then go and apply EQ to the group buses. So all of the guitars at once. And here it's just one guitar, but it's multiple microphones mixed together. So why would I EQ them individually? I just EQ them on the bus. The whole drum kit, maybe the drums in general need more top end. I'll just add it on the bus. If there were several backing vocal parts, it wouldn't be worth the time to go through and mix those individually unless I had a particular reason to do so. So again, apply EQ on your mix bus, on your group buses, and don't just resort to only using EQ on individual channels. In fact, I try to avoid using EQ on individual channels unless I have a particular reason to do so. Mistake number 4 is not being aggressive when you need to be. So this is another one of those rules that seems to come up now and then. You know, use 3 dB chunks for cutting and boosting and avoid aggressive boosts. This kind of stuff, just again, forget about it. It comes back to intention. If you need to be aggressive to get where you need to go, then by all means do it. And of course, there are guidelines. So I could say to you, on your mix bus, you're probably only going to need 1 or 2 dB. In most cases, that's enough to get you where you want to go without ruining the mix and being too detrimental. But if you have a specific intention and you need a 5 dB cut on the mix bus to do that, then do it. If you need to add 10 dB of top end to a snare to make it sound aggressive, do it. Do whatever you need to do to get there. Let me show you a quick example. So I'm just going to load up an EQ on this kick drum, and we're going to try and really bring out this beta sound. And it's probably going to be somewhere around here. Once we find it, let's try boosting it really aggressively because I feel like this kick isn't cutting through the mix enough.
Get me low. You get me low. You get me low. Get me low. You get me low now. You get me low.
So there you go. It needed quite a lot, 6 dBs to help that cut through the mix. Now, whether this is the right way to do it or not, that's another question. I would probably try using saturation instead. But it just goes to show that sometimes adding 6 dB, even when it's quite a narrow boost like this, if it works, it works. Don't be afraid to do it. Mistake number 5 is using the solo button. As you just saw there, I soloed the kick there so you could hear what was going on, but in a mix, I would never do that. I would avoid the solo button at all costs. And a lot of people struggle with this. So what I recommend instead is that you just turn up the channel that you're working on. As you saw me do just a second ago, turn up that kick while you're dialing in that EQ so that it's easier to hear what's going on, and once you've dialed it in, drop it back down to the level you want it. Now, we've already covered a lot here, so I'm going to keep moving fast, and make sure you download that cheat sheet to remember all of this and apply it. I'm moving on now to mistake number 6, which is applying a high pass to everything. Now, it seems like a lot of people recommend doing this, but if you do it and you apply a high pass to everything, your mixes might come out sounding weak and pathetic. It's essentially like applying a low pass filter to the mix bus.
Get me low.
See how thin that sounds? And then when we get rid of that,
Get me low.
you lose all of that low end. And now that's a very drastic example there. Most people wouldn't cut that low end out of the bass and the kick, but it gives you an idea of what can happen when you start to apply a high pass filter to everything. Again, it comes back to this idea of intention. If there's noise in the low end, or if you want to tighten up that low end a little bit, it's a great way to use high pass filters. Just tighten up the low end of a kick by adding a high pass filter at maybe 40 hertz. But unless you had a reason to apply a high pass filter, again, don't just do it for the sake of it. Mistake number 7 is wasting time and money on plugins. Now, to get your mixes to a certain level, once you're very happy with your mixes using stock plugins and you want to take them to that next place, then sure, you're probably going to have to buy plugins. You can see here I've been using the FabFilter plugin, which isn't free, and it's not cheap by any means either. But what I recommend is you learn 1 or 2 plugins really well. With EQ, it's quite easy to find an EQ that's highly versatile, like the one that comes with your DAW, or like FabFilter Pro Q2, this typical fully parametric EQ where I can add shelves, I can do whatever I want, all within here. You don't really need anything else. And when you start buying loads of different analog modeling EQs, it starts to get confusing. You waste time and energy deciding which ones to buy. Then you have to learn how they work. And then in the heat of a mix, you have to decide which one am I going to use. And all of these things are just distractions. If you're a DIY musician, if you're someone who makes their own music at home, I highly recommend you just have 1 or 2 go-to EQs. Sure, if you're a professional, you might need 5 different analog modeling EQs or even some real hardware. But if you're a DIY musician, 1 EQ is more than enough. Mistake number 8 is not using the bypass button. Again, you've already seen me do this. Once you've applied your EQ, you want to check it actually improves the sound. So we just flip back and forth, and you'd be surprised at how many people don't do this.
Get me low.
Just check that it achieved your intention. What I like to do here is shut my eyes. Keep flicking or flick a random amount of time so you can't tell with your eyes shut whether it's on or off. And then click that mouse button, going on, off. Decide which one sounds best with your eyes shut, and you won't actually know which one it is, whether it's on or off. And then open your eyes, see. Because if it's actually off and you prefer it, then maybe you didn't achieve your intention, and this plugin is just completely unnecessary. Now, if you're doing really drastic cuts, so if I was cutting this a lot, then what you can hear there is that there's a loss in volume. So sometimes when you're doing drastic EQ, you need to volume match to make sure it's the same volume when you're bypassing it and bringing it back in. Something like that, but it's only really needed if you're doing something really aggressive. Mistake number 9 is worrying about plugin order. Now, of all of the things in a mix that are going to have an impact on the end sound, plugin order is very, very, very low on the list. A lot of people obsess over should EQ come before or after compression. Honestly, there's no right answer anyway. It purely depends on the context. And at the end of the day, it's really not going to make that big of a difference. And there isn't an answer. Just try moving them around. But I don't really worry about plugin order that much unless there's a particular reason. For example, you want to add EQ before a reverb, something like that, to change the sound going into the reverb. If there's a particular reason why you need a certain plugin order, then do it, but otherwise don't worry about it. Mistake number 10 is not learning the frequency spectrum. And this is just having an awareness of how the different frequencies sound and, what the actual spectrum is. It goes from 20 to 20 kilohertz. This is the upper mid-range, this is the lower mid-range, etc. Just have a basic understanding of what the frequency spectrum is, how it works, and that will help you a lot when it comes to figuring out what frequencies you need to cut or boost to achieve your intention. And that brings me on to the final mistake number 11, which is not training your ears. If you want to get good at EQ fast, then training your ears is one of the easiest ways to do this because it allows you to very quickly identify issues with a mix or with a particular source. So as you saw me do at the beginning of this video, listening to the whole mix and saying, it's a bit muddy, it needs a bit more aggression in the upper mid-range, I could actually hear what frequencies I'd need to go to. And once you're in the ballpark, you don't need to be precise. You could see there I was kind of moving it around, but I knew it was going to be roughly around this area. And the same thing here, I knew that brightness and aggression, but not quite getting into airiness was going to be around here as well. So I knew where to start and then I could tweak. Now, the quickest way to do this is to use a service, a quiz ear training service that actually gives you various blind tests and helps you to train your ears through various exercises. Soundgym.co, that's a great option. Also, my buddy Dan from Pro Audiophiles, he has a great app called QuizTones. Just use one of these training apps. It's going to speed up your progress so fast, and most of them are highly affordable. It's going to have a much bigger impact than any plugin will, but generally it will cost a fraction of a premium plugin. So there you go. Now, there's a lot to remember here. You need to recap all of these to make sure you don't forget them. And of course, we haven't even touched on the strategy behind EQ or any of that, which is more important than a lot of this in many cases. How do you figure out what the intention is? Well, I put together a free EQ cheat sheet that will take you through the strategy behind EQ. It has some EQ charts in there so you can start to learn the frequency spectrum. I also outline these mistakes so you can recap them anytime. It's completely free. There's a link in the bio or a link on the screen now. So go grab that, and then I'll see you same place next week. And remember, create regardless.